I don't believe in writing only when you feel like it or only when you feel inspired. I don't think that's the way to complete any kind of writing project. It needs you to admit to yourself that I want to be a writer, I want to write a novel. But if you're writing a few short stories here and there, you can put off that admission to yourself. You can, because it takes a little bit of courage, I think, to say, I want to be a writer. It's an interesting one. Nobody's asked me that, quite honestly.
A lover of short stories and out with your first novel, if I'm right. Yes, we have with us Miss Tejaswini and Tejaswini Apte-Rahm. Your name itself is very beautiful. So let's start off with how Tejaswini was as a young girl. How were you as a kid? Let's get to know you from then.
I was an only child, and so books were my constant companion. I was reading all the time, and I wasn't much of an outdoor person either. So it was just books all the way.
So what did you read? What were the kind?
Well, growing up in the early 80s in Bombay, there really wasn't much of a choice. It was basically Enid Blyton.
Ah,
So I think I must have read her entire repertoire, from fairy stories to boarding school stories, Famous Five, Secret Seven, adventure stories, everything.
and do you really think that later on those stories influenced your writing?
Yes, absolutely. Because I think her strengths are excellent characterization and fast paced plots and a very precise use of language. And I think I probably, I definitely have that influence in my writing.
Basically, you're a lover of short stories, if I'm right. You write a lot of short stories, and then now you've graduated to a novel as well. So, this short story, why is the liking for short stories? Is there any particular reason for that?
I don't particularly like short stories more than novels. I like both. It's
No,
just that
writing.
but it's just that my first book was a collection of short stories. And I guess the reason for that was that I probably didn't admit to myself for quite a while that I wanted to be a writer. I was just scribbling a few stories here and there. And of course, writing a novel takes a lot more commitment. It needs you to admit to yourself that I want to be a writer, I want to write a novel. But if you're writing a few short stories here and there, you can put off that admission to yourself. You can, because it takes a little bit of courage, I think, to say, I want to be a writer.
So, how did you realize that you have the courage in you to become a full-fledged writer, as you said? So,
Well, when I wrote a few of the stories and I read back through them, I thought I have something here, and that gave me the confidence to write a few more.
who's the first person that you go ahead with your transcript the moment you write, whether it's a short story or a novel? Is it someone in within the family, or is it your friends or someone else? How do you go about
So
it?
it's always my husband. He's
Okay.
always my first reader and first critic, and he is actually a really good editor. I think it's important to have a first reader who knows where you're coming from, who knows what you're trying to do, and who is honest without being harsh. This kind of first reader is invaluable. I think one has to be really careful who you give your first draft to. I wouldn't give it to just anyone because it's very easy to lose your confidence at that stage.
Ah.
So you don't want to give it to somebody who's going to be insensitive about it and tear it down. And you don't want to give it to somebody who's just going to pat you on the back and say how wonderful you are. It needs to be somebody who gives you a balanced view in a kind and compassionate manner, and somebody who's going to give you constructive criticism.
So, talking about constructive criticism, if I were to ask you, the first draft that whatever you wrote and you gave it to him, what was the one thing that actually struck you that, yes, I have to change this or I need to improve upon this? Would you share that with us?
Um,
Something that.
there were many things which there wasn't any one big structural change that my husband asked for it, but it's the smaller changes, things where he might say, you want your character to say this, on the other hand, your character is doing that. It doesn't make sense. That sort of thing.
Oh,
Basically,
okay.
looking for inconsistencies.
Okay.
Um, That's
and
quite important.
and your characters. Tell us more about your characters. How do you derive them? Is it the people in your life, or are they the people you see on the street, or your friends, or molded on you? How are the characters formed in your stories?
So, for my novel, The Secret of More, which is my latest book, the book is loosely based on the life of my great grandfather. And so I did a lot of research by talking for hours and hours to older family members who had childhood memories of their grandfather. He died in 1952. Um, and so it was the older family members who told me about him and about the other people in his life. Um, so in the novel, many of the characters are based on real life people. On the other hand, it's a great mistake to try and base a fictional character entirely on a real life person. I think that's just a no-no, because then I think your writing gets trapped in the reality of it, or in trying to make it as trying to make your characters as close to the real person as possible. Whereas in fact, I think you can you can base a character on a real person, but you've got to give your fiction the space to fly on its own wings.
Okay, so what is the secret of more according to you in your personal life? If I would ask you, what is the secret of more for Tejaswini?
Um, well, I think the secret, in my novel, let's start with my novel. In my novel, everybody has their own definition of wanting more. So Tatya, who's the protagonist, he is a very ambitious man, and he wants more success in business. That's his whole thing. That's his character. He's a very ambitious man, and this is set in early 20th century Bombay. And Bombay, of course, is a city that invites risk, it invites ambition, and it often rewards risk taking and ambition. And that's the journey that Tatya finds himself on. He makes his fortune in the textile industry and then in the silent film industry. And so you see the change of Bombay from moving very quickly from tradition to modernity within the space of 5 decades. So the novel takes place between 1899 and 1952. So that's his definition of wanting more. But every character has their own definition of wanting more. Most significantly, his son, Sharad, uh, who wants more sporting glory. He's essentially a sportsman, and he does his duty by following in his father's footsteps. But it creates a conflict with his father, because they essentially want two different things. Tatya's daughter, Durga, is. So, this is a world where girls are pulled out of school and married off at the age of 12. This was the norm at the time. But Durga is growing up on this cusp of tradition and modernity, and she is itching to spread her wings and fly. She wants to educate herself more. She wants to do far more than what was allowed to her mother's generation. So that's another definition of wanting
More.
more. Um, so to go back to your question of what, for me, what more is, it's an interesting one. Nobody's asked me that, quite honestly. For me, the more is, I think, being true to yourself and the people you love.
So that would be your more, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think from even from the name, it's so different, unique, that it gets you thinking. That's the reason I asked you, because I was wondering what would I want more from life. So how did you get this name? How did you chance upon it? Was it a lot of thinking that you had to do, or it just sprung upon you? How did it
At
happen?
some point, it just it occurred to me exactly because of this explanation of the fact that I realized that this novel is basically about people wanting more, but everybody wants something different. Everybody means something different by more. So, what is the secret of it? That is something people will have to read to find out. I don't want to give that
No,
away.
no, no, not at all. It shouldn't be a giveaway.
No.
And yes, how much of hard work was it? Because I'm just curious to know, how's the life of a writer? I mean, is it that you write from dawn to dusk, or is it just that you randomly have thoughts and you scribble them down and then you compile them? How does the mind of a writer actually work?
So, I'm a great believer in working to a schedule.
Ah,
I don't believe in writing only when you feel like it, or only when you feel inspired. I don't think that's the way to complete any kind of writing project. I think the thing to do is to show up for work every day as if it were any other job. And so I write for 2 or 3 hours every morning, whether I want to or not.
But are you able to, your thoughts, your ideas, the story, does it flow by or?
Yeah, it does. If you show up for work, it'll work. And if you don't show up for work, you end up with a blank page and you can't do anything at all with that. So whether it's good writing, bad writing, or indifferent writing, the point is to get it down. And then if it's not great, you can always edit it. But if you have nothing on the page, you can't do anything with it.
And have you had your writer's block experiences?
Um, so I think real life is going to get in the way, right? You can't lock yourself up in a garret. That kind of romantic notion I don't subscribe to. You have other responsibilities, you have other things going on. I have a child, so she always takes precedence over everything else for me, including my writing. And that's where the importance of schedules come in. Because I can, of course, now she's much older, but when she was younger, I could only write when she was at school.
So your short stories, did you start writing it for her, or was it apart from that? So how did you actually find out that you have a skill for writing? Because you did mention you used to devour books. But then at some point of time, you must have thought, no, I don't just read, I need to write. So when was that point of time in your life?
I think in school, I always enjoyed writing essays in English literature, especially creative writing essays. I was probably like the English teacher's
Pet?
pet student in whichever English teacher I had at various points of time. I always loved those classes.
And would you tell yourself stories, or would you create them out of characters in your class? How would it happen?
So my very first memory of writing a story entirely for myself, which had nothing to do with writing anything for class, was uh, it was I grew up in a high-rise building in Bombay with a huge, vast view of the sea. So I lived on the 23rd floor, so I could see the sea and I could see the waves and the sky and the clouds. It was all very present in my life, and the wind would just blow through our apartment. Um, and I wrote a story about a young boy who steps out onto a cloud and is carried away and can never come home again.
Ah,
So it was a slightly morbid story, but that was my first. I think that was my very first story that I wrote just for myself, inspired directly by what I saw outside my window.
and you still have the transcript with you?
Yeah, I do.
Oh, so what about the stories that you've written and that have never seen the light of day? Are there stories like that?
There are fragments of stories. I think I figure out pretty early on where that something isn't working, and then I don't complete it.
And talking about, you see, so you've just mentioned that this book spans 5 decades. So over these, right from the 80s when you were a little girl to now, what do you think? I mean, do you think there's been a vast difference in the way people have approached books, the way people read? What is your take on the reading habits that we have today and how people go about it?
Well, I think the most obvious change is that there are now a lot more things to do apart from
So
reading.
more distractions.
More distractions. When I was growing up, there really wasn't that much to do. Especially since I was an only child. If I'd had siblings, I would probably have run out to play a lot more.
And see, basically, you did tell me that you found out your passion is in writing, and we did mention about the short stories and the novels. But how did you actually think that okay, this novel is something I'm going to write about my great grandfather? Was there any inspiring moment or a short snippet that you heard that made you prompted you to take up this decision? Was there any particular instance?
So basically, I got interested in my great grandfather because I was told that my father was his favorite grandchild.
Ah,
So that was the first spark of interest.
okay.
And I felt that, oh, I want to know more about him. And once I came to know the bare bones of his story, um, I something just inspired me to find out a lot more. I wasn't content with just finding out what he did. I wanted to find out the context in which he did it. So basically, he began life in a chawl. He was a migrant to Bombay, came with nothing much in his pockets, and he started living in a chawl, sharing a room with two other men. So he was very poor. And then he made his fortune as a selling agent of textiles, made enough money that he could become a financier of silent films. He became the financier of Dada Saheb Phalke, who's today known as the father of Indian cinema. Opened a company called the Hindustan Film Company, which produced more than 100 silent feature films and many more shorts and documentaries. And by this time, he was a very, very wealthy man, and eventually became a sugar industrialist, and ended his life in a sea-facing mansion, pretty much living like a prince. So you can imagine the journey of this person, and I thought it would be an incredible story to take off from and create a fictional world around. Um, and the more and the only way I could make sense of his life was to really dig into the social and business context of that era. Why did he make the decisions he made? What was the environment of the city that enabled this meteoric rise?
So after The Secret of More, what can we expect from Tejaswini next? Do you have anything in the offing, or is it yet to come? I mean,
So, in my short stories, in these circuses that sweep through the landscape, that was my first collection. I focused on quite a different part of my personality, I think. Many of the stories are quite dark and twisty. And I explore the thin line that there is between dark and light, between sanity and insanity,
insanity.
between good and evil. Um, and the frightening thing for me is how thin that line actually is. It's a very, very small step from here to there. And that's the sort of thing I explored in the short stories. With this novel or historical fiction, um, there's nothing dark or twisty about it. It's a deep dive into the history, into the building up quite a vast
Empire.
cast of characters, and exploring the city. And I wonder whether I can bring both these elements together somehow, while still staying in that historical era, because I loved
Being
being and
there.
immersing myself in that historical era.
Oh, that's beautiful. Definitely, we'll be expecting something of that sort from you in the future. And so, we've been talking about journeys, the journey of your grandfather, the journey of this
Great
book,
grandfather.
great grandfather, forgive me. So, we've been talking about the journey of your great grandfather, the journey of this book, the journey of your writing. So, if I would ask you now, we've been having the short journey, this long journey in a short period of time. How did you?
How did I do that? How did
The whole thing. How did you? You are at a point of life. So, how did you reach here? Is the question. How did you?
How did I get here? One thing I didn't say at the beginning is how I quite accidentally fell into writing books at all.
Oh,
Because I've always been writing in one form or another. I started off wanting to be an advertising copywriter. Then I became a journalist. I was a film journalist for a couple of years in Bombay. And then I became an environmental researcher and writer. And I did a couple of research projects, which were supposed to be research papers, basically, or pamphlets. But the research ballooned into something extensive and interesting. And both those research projects were published as books, completely accidentally. They were never meant to be books. And so that gave me the confidence to think that, okay, I clearly have the stamina to write a book on environmental issues. Why can't I do the same for fiction? And I really think that was the turning point, just these two completely accidental books that pushed me on to gaining the confidence to write a book of fiction.
So, well, it's a potent combination of luck and hard work, I would say.
I should think so, yes.
So, well, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure having you with us on How Did You podcast. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.